Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmercedcoder.com with another video on how to use MercedUI. So in the last video we talked about how to use state and props. Now I want to talk about global state. So what if I want to kind of have both these components work off their own state? Basically, they don't they don't work off a particular whatever. I have to register it with the global state. The global state is actually built into the MercedElement class. It's a static. So basically all I have to do is do MercedElement, and I'm pretty sure it's .g register, meaning global register. G register, and I'm going to have to put in the name of the component. So test1. Okay, but I need to go get the other component. Okay, const test2 equals document dot query selector. In this case it's test2 if I remember correctly. Just double check. Test2. Good. So I'm going to do this once. So first I'm going to register test1, then I'm going to register test2. And basically what this is doing is that the MercedElement as a class is storing an array of all these components that I've registered with it, which it doesn't matter how I create it. As long as I create it in one of these two ways. If I create it this way or I create it this way, it should work. Actually, I think it should pretty much work with any of the ways I have it set up. I'm pretty I'd have to play around with that, but for sure those two ways. Okay, get G register, and then basically now they're both registered with the global state. And basically what happens is that when the global state gets updated, it's going to go back and then iteratively run that builder function on each of those components. So let's go back over here. Let's change this to MercedElement. So we're asking, and then it's G set state. G set state. And basically works the same way. It's going to set the state, except it's setting the global state, which will then re-render all of the registered components. So let's refresh. So before it only changed one. Now when I click the button, it'll change both. I changed! Yay! Now when would this be useful? Think about, like, you have an object with all the user's information, and you have several different components that each take that user information and display it in different ways. Having this, all those components will re-render every time the user's information changes, without having to necessarily build that logic into each component individually. So that's a thing you can do. Cool. Now, what if you wanted to have more than one global state? Okay, then there's also something called the global store function. In the documentation, you can read about that. It gets into some of the other ways I have to create components. So any of those ways work with the global store. So in that situation, you're actually creating a freestanding global store that's not attached to the MercedElement class. You can create as many of those as you want, and each of them will have their own separate registry for components, and they work the same way. It's just instead of it being part of the class, it's standalone. There's basically everything. Basically, I had built all these standalone pieces, and then the MercedElement is kind of a nice abstraction over that has all the pieces kind of built into it, which makes it work a lot nicer and smoother. So this is a great way to start. But again, if you want to be more flexible, you can find sort of a lot of those pieces that are built into MercedElement deconstructed in other functions in the library. So that way you can do crazy cool things with them. Yeah, so that's how the global state works.